Hi, I'm Ava. That fateful evening when everything shifted for me, my mom grabbed my arm, pinned me against the foyer wall of a packed ballroom, and hissed into my ear, "The city's richest folks are all here tonight. Park yourself in the backmost spot, and whatever you do, stay out of the spotlight." Her words hit like a punch, a stark wake-up call that to her, I was no child of hers, just a flaw to tuck away. I came across as some embarrassing hidden truth, a broken part in the flawless family facade she slaved to maintain. Ever felt like a burden to your own relatives, like your existence alone was a hassle? Before I dive into what unfolded when the spotlights hit and Mom's face lost all color, drop a comment below about where you're tuning in from and hit subscribe. Believe me, you don't want to skip the moment the whole room stood up cheering for me. Things weren't always this way in our home. The wealth showed up a couple of years back, and along with it emerged a transformed version of my mother, Celeste. She got fixated on prestige, on looks, on breaking into the elite crowd in Coral Gables, Miami. Overnight, our sprawling multi-million-dollar estate turned into her private theater, with my big sister Brianna as the star performer. Brianna had it all, thriving in her career, driven and gifted at handling media in ways I'd never match. Me. I was the piano player, the idealist, the one holding on to a creative pursuit that Mom saw as pointless and moneyless. Dad, Marcus, was forever gone, buried in the job that funded this upgraded life, turning into a quiet observer of the widening emotional divide tearing through our family. That unfairness wasn't a one-off. It permeated my daily existence. The deepest mark of my erasure was Grandpa's piano. It was a vintage Steinway upright, its frame scarred from years of play, with a few ivory keys faded to yellow, still bearing the subtle traces of his touch. He'd shown me how to play, how to express myself through notes when talking fell short. For me, that instrument went beyond decor. It was my legacy, my safe haven, the sole spot where I could just be me, free from scrutiny. Yet in our sleek, new residence, nothing so storied and unpolished had a place. Celeste shoved it into a cramped storage space upstairs, amid dusty crates and outdated pieces that clashed with her trendy decor vibe. Each time I stepped into that chilly, grimy area, it was like paying a visit to my own banished self. Sharply at odds, the central living area served as Brianna's shrine. Perched on the sleek marble mantel beneath custom spotlights sat her career accolades and honors. They included shiny crystal figurines and buffed brass plates touting her wins as Rising Business Star of the Year or Pioneer in Finance Breakthroughs. Mom would polish them herself daily and never passed up a chance to flaunt them to any visitor stepping through the door. "That's my Brie," she'd beam, bursting with smug satisfaction. Those shiny, icy items stood for everything my family prized: concrete wins, financial might, widespread acclaim. My melodies, by contrast, were abstract, heartfelt, and thus, in Mom's eyes, utterly worthless. I recall a meal a few months prior with some of Dad's colleagues. One visitor, a gentle senior gentleman, inquired about my hobbies. The second I started sharing my love for the keys, Mom interrupted with a patronizing chuckle. Ava with her tunes," she dismissed, like chatting about a cute kid's whim. It's her little pastime. It occupies her while Brianna constructs a dynasty. Heat rushed from my cheeks. The embarrassment burned so fiercely that a lump lodged in my throat, silencing me through the entire evening. I glanced at Brianna, who flashed a tiny, self-satisfied grin, then at Dad, who just dropped his eyes to his food, dodging any clash. In that quiet, it hit me. I was utterly on my own. The evening of Dad's firm's charity event marked the peak of all those quiet degradations. Getting ready at the house was a frenzy centered solely on Celeste and Brianna. Their high-end dresses, shipped straight from a design district shop, dangled like masterpieces. Stylists for hair and makeup buzzed around their suites, while I prepped quietly in my own space, slipping into an off-the-rack gown from a chain store. Decent enough, but it yelled second-rate beside theirs. The drive in Dad's sleek black Cadillac Escalade toward the upscale spot on Miami Beach hung heavy with unspoken tension. I stared at the blurring city glow outside, a squeeze in my ribs hinting I sensed the night ahead would deliver more of the usual, more dismissal, more veiled disdain. Stepping into the venue, the vibe hit like a wave. The GR. The ballroom sparkled under glittering crystal chandeliers that cascaded like shimmering jewels, while the atmosphere buzzed with the chatter of Miami's high society. My mother shifted in a flash. Her grin radiated brilliance, her gestures graceful and deliberate. She glided through the throng like a seasoned commander, presenting Brianna to one notable after another. It happened just then, moments after exchanging pleasantries with a prominent property tycoon, when she drew me away. Her hold on my elbow was tight, bordering on bruising. She guided me to a quieter spot by the staff door, locked her gaze onto mine, and unleashed those words like sharpened blades. Her tone held no fury, just icy practical ruthlessness. She was safeguarding her place in the social hierarchy, and I posed a threat that demanded containment. They ushered me compliantly to my spot, a modest two-seater in the dimmest, most remote nook of the room, tucked beside a utility drape. From that vantage, I could observe the whole affair perfectly, yet remain utterly unseen by the crowd. I observed my relatives dominating the scene. My mother chuckled with infectious energy and poise. Brianna, at her side, inclined her head assuredly as a financier addressed her with clear respect. My dad was deep in a deal-making discussion, bourbon clutched in his fist. They projected the ideal portrait of a formidable, cohesive clan, and I lingered as the overlooked moon, circling in a path so remote that my presence scarcely merited a mention on their grand evening. The bursts of mirth and the tinkle of crystal glasses drifted to me faintly like a far-off murmur, solidifying the invisible barrier dividing me from them. To keep the sobs from spilling over my face, I grabbed the event brochure from the surface. It was a substantial, refined volume of sleek pages, bearing my dad's firm emblem in gilded script. I leafed through it aimlessly, merely to give my fingers and thoughts a diversion from the persistent throb in my heart. I skimmed the sections on addresses, the auction lots, the profiles of the awardees, and finally, in the lineup of performances, my attention halted on a subtle italicized footnote tucked at the page's edge. We must apologize, but our featured pianist, Mr. Theodore Jones, will not perform this evening owing to sudden health issues. In the shadows of my hideaway, a faint flicker stirred within. It wasn't a strategy or a formed thought, just an opening, a hint of brightness where I'd assumed all hope had vanished. My pulse leaped sharply against my bones. That line in the booklet appeared to shimmer amid the obscurity around me, serving as both a summons and a verdict. I glanced at the platform where a majestic ebony Steinway concert grand sat hushed beneath a single beam. It was a splendid instrument, gleaming and flawless, worlds apart from my grandpa's beloved, worn-out upright. Briefly, a surge of fear crashed through me, sending shivers along my back. What right did I have to even consider it? I turned again to my kin. They thrived in their surroundings, joking, mingling, wholly unaware of me or the turmoil churning inside. The notion so vivid and daring moments before started to dwindle beneath the burden of endless self-doubt, fading to a mere murmur of defiance. Right in that instant of hesitation, a waiter neared my table. For a split second, I imagined he sought my drink choice, a brief nod to routine. But instead, with detached briskness, he said, "Miss, would you shift your seat slightly leftward? The dessert trolley needs passage." He avoided my stare entirely. I was merely in the path, something to nudge aside for the smooth flow of proceedings. I complied quietly, sliding my chair mere inches over the plush rug. The embarrassment was tiny, unnoticed by others, but to me it felt like the cosmos endorsing my mother's decree. My role was peripheral, unobtrusive, never in the spotlight or in anyone's way. I shrank further into obscurity, a discarded ornament in the margins of a celebration that excluded me. I gripped the brochure as if it were salvation, scanning the cancellation announcement repeatedly. My mother's words rang in my ears, dismissing my playing as a juvenile pastime, an empty pursuit. Yet in opposition, my grandfather's encouragement resurfaced. "Your melodies aren't meant for them, my little Elenita," he'd say, his weathered hands directing my own across the keys. "They're yours alone. They're your essence. Don't ever allow silence to claim them." That clash between those opposing views of my world was what shaped my core. One embodied my mother's chase for prestige and validation. The other, my grandfather's inheritance of passion and creativity. In that shadowed recess, I grasped that the night's true stakes lay not in captivating others. It was about choosing which voice would triumph in the struggle for my spirit. I lifted my head, and my sight met Daniel's, my dad's aide. He was positioned, standing close to one of the ballroom's pillars. He watched the gathering with his typical restraint. Daniel stood out among the folks in my family's fresh social orbit as someone who had always shown real curiosity toward me. On occasions when he dropped by the home on business, he'd slip a glance into the practice space and inquire about the composition I was working on. He recognized my deep enthusiasm, and in contrast to the rest, he'd never dismissed it. As our gazes connected, he offered no grin, just a subtle, hardly noticeable incline of his head. It conveyed comprehension rather than sympathy. It seemed he could sense the concept fighting to emerge in my thoughts, and rather than critique it, he bestowed a quiet endorsement. That minor action served as a steadying force amid my ocean of uncertainties. Moments afterward, the event host ascended the platform. Flashing a polished grin, he lightly struck the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, a quick update on tonight's lineup," he declared. "Unfortunately, our skilled performer, Mr. Theodore Jones, won't be with us this evening, but rest assured, melody has a way of persisting." A wave of dismay rippled through the attendees. My palms grew damp. The chance was no longer a concealed gap in the schedule. It had become a declared absence, a glaring vacancy at the event's core. For an instant, all eyes shifted to the lone keyboard on stage, now emblematic of a shattered commitment. Yet for me, it resembled a portal flung ajar. The issue wasn't about availability anymore, but about summoning the bravery to step through. My thoughts raced straight to the neglected chamber upstairs in our Coral Gables residence. There, draped under a pale cover, sat my grandfather's instrument. I recalled the texture of its aged frame, the faintly discordant tones of certain keys, the aroma of legacy and recollections that wafted from it. That piano had been my sanctuary, my trusted ally. The majestic one on the platform, however, was built for display, a flawless apparatus crafted to dazzle. They represented clashing realms. Still, the lessons in melody from my grandfather weren't centered on flawlessness. They focused on feeling. They involved conveying a tale devoid of speech. I understood that the tool itself held no importance. What counted was the heart behind it. I could channel the essence of that overlooked heirloom and let it echo within this space crowded with unfamiliar faces. Deep in reflection, I noticed Brianna approaching my spot at the table. She was with a refined lady who hung on her every word. She didn't pause or glance my way, but as she went by, I caught her light-hearted chuckle followed by, "Oh yes, that's my younger sibling, Ava. She's quite reserved, you see. She likes to stay out of the spotlight." The lady flicked a brief look in my direction, blending intrigue with a hint of superiority, then continued onward. Reserved came across as a polite term for irrelevant. It lacked my mother's malice, yet it stung deeper, a offhand dismissal, a method of erasing me from the family portrait in others' presence, like I was merely a marginal note in her dazzling life story. The hurt pierced keenly and icily, underscoring that even to my sister, I posed an awkward presence in society. From my vantage point, I could dissect the hierarchies at play in the ballroom. My mother reigned supreme without challenge. She glided with deliberate poise, her flowing silk attire swirling in her wake. I observed her chuckling with a regional official, lightly brushing the elbow of a financier's spouse, and introducing Brianna to a financier with evident delight. Each motion, each phrase was a calculated exchange aimed at bolstering her standing. My father, Marcus, remained at her flank, though he functioned more as a supporter than a ruler. His duty involved funding the display, offering smiles as required, and covering the expenses that sustained this elaborate production. Within this network, worth was gauged by connections, sway, and the skill of broadcasting unblemished achievement. My abstract devotion and absence of worldly drive rendered me valueless. To my mother, I essentially tallied as a deficit. It was right then that Daniel appeared beside me without a sound, nearly catching me off guard. He bent low, feigning to fix an item on the table, and breathed into my ear. His tone was a faint whisper beneath the ambient tunes. "The platform's vacant, Ava. The keys are ready. The announcer's scrambling for a fix." He hesitated, then delivered the phrase that shifted it all. "Your grandfather once shared with me. Her playing can halt the clock. Maybe these folks could use a pause in time." He wasn't commanding me, but granting approval. He was evoking my true self, not via my mother's viewpoint, but through the lens of the one who initially instilled in me a love for harmony. The unfairness of my circumstances clashed directly with my grandfather's inheritance, and I realized I could no longer remain seated. I drew in a steadying breath, sensing it expand my chest and steady my quivering fingers. Gradually, I rose. My legs wobbled, as though they might buckle. I straightened my outfit, a quiet act that seemed like donning a suit of steel. I cast a final glance at the head table. My mom was beaming at somebody nearby. My sibling was scrolling through her device, and Dad was absorbed in chat with a colleague from work. They inhabited their separate realm, a sphere beyond my reach. Yet for the initial time, no sorrow washed over me. Instead, an odd wave of freedom surged. They overlooked me, yet it ceased to sting. I was poised to claim my spotlight, dictated by my rules alone. I began striding forward, each footfall pulling me from the dim obscurity of my spot and drawing me nearer to the lone glow enveloping the platform. The chatter in the grand hall didn't hush right away, though I sensed gazes starting to trail after me. Initially, it was just those at the closest setups, folks viewing me as an oddity, a lone female proceeding with unexplained resolve. But nearer to the platform I drew, the influence expanded like waves across a pond. Dialogue started to stutter, necks craned. I perceived the burden of countless stares upon me, blending bewilderment, curiosity, and astonishment. Invisibility had vanished. Each stride across that luxurious rug stood as rebellion against decades of muted existence. Dread evaded me. Instead, an eerie serenity prevailed, as though I advanced toward fate itself. I arrived at the base of the modest stairs ascending to the platform. My pulse thundered like a bass drum, primed for the showstopper of my existence. I ascended the initial riser, then the next. Reality contracted to the tight beam of illumination ahead. The hall's buzz morphed into a distant roar in my ears, akin to ocean waves echoing within a conch. The press of inquisitive looks dissolved, yielding solely to the piano's irresistible draw. It resembled years of submerged wandering, and with each rising tear, I neared the breakthrough to gulp my inaugural true lungful of oxygen. My palms, once quivering, now gripped with unexpected steadiness, as if aware of their imminent mission. My steps carried conviction not from rational thought, but from profound depths, a primal urge insisting this path was essential. Upon gaining the stage, the host pivoted in my direction. His polished grin hardened into a visage of bewilderment. He was a man in his 40s, with hair meticulously groomed and attire flawlessly tailored, evidently accustomed to commanding every instant of the gathering. His lips parted, likely to halt me or query my bold intrusion. Our stares locked briefly. I couldn't tell what reflected in mine for him, maybe not the unseen offspring of Marcus Rucker, but a figure utterly devoid of risks. Prior to any syllable from him, I dipped my chin marginally and murmured in a timbre alien to my ears, "If you would, just a single piece." My delivery held no supplication, only resolve. It proclaimed rather than begged. He froze, taken aback by my nerve, and in that pause, my opening emerged. I brushed by him, sans awaiting reply, heading directly to the instrument. Up close it loomed even grander. The ebony gloss gleamed beneath the overhead beams, mirroring a warped, stretched likeness of my features. Unlike my grandfather's, it carried no aura of legacy, just the scent of wax and latent promise. I settled onto the cool leather perch. Briefly, alarm loomed once more. The expanse of the hall unfurled ahead, an ocean of faceless crowds amid ornate spreads. A twinge of familiar doubt pierced me, my mom's echo murmuring that this space wasn't mine. Yet as my digits brushed the ivories, a jolt like lightning coursed through, grounding me to my core intent. The piano offered no critique. It simply anticipated. Right then, while my touch reacquainted with the notes, I lifted my gaze, landing on the central table. There she was. My mother, Celeste, fixed her stare upon me. Her discussion had halted abruptly. The gracious grin aimed at a key executive had evaporated, supplanted by sheer incredulity. Her typically sharp, scheming eyes bulged, locked on me amid horror and frosty rage. No astonishment, no worry. Just the outrage of a flawless narrative, torn apart by an understudy bold enough to ad-lib. Her complexion blanched under the lavish cosmetics, her mandible locked so rigidly that a faint tick danced in her jawline. Time halted. In her look, judgment loomed. Next to her, Brianna's response diverged, yet unveiled just as much. Her initial reaction was mortification. I watched her face redden, her glance flicking hastily to nearby groups, assessing the blow to her reputation. Her posture broadcast unease. She huddled a bit in her chair, as if yearning for the ground to engulf her entirely. She wasn't locking eyes with me outright, but shifting her stare between my silhouette on the stage and her flute of champagne, as though she couldn't settle on which sight tormented her more. And my dad, Marcus, just seemed utterly adrift. His features, typically absorbed in corporate matters, now brimmed with profound disorientation. He gazed at me like I was some unfamiliar person, a child he never truly recognized. In his expression, there wasn't rage, just this profound disquiet that stung deeper than my mom's wrath. Her stare felt like a beam intent on drilling right through me, wordlessly demanding I rise from that bench and vanish back into obscurity. For the briefest instant, it nearly worked. The burden of her disdain pressed down like an invisible hand I'd always yielded to. My posture sagged as uncertainty crept in to erode my resolve. What on earth was I thinking? Here I was, on the verge of the ultimate rebellion in my life, right in view of the very folks whose judgments she deemed essential. Yet suddenly, my grandfather's visage flashed in my thoughts, vivid as if he were right there beside me. I recalled his gnarled fingers clasping mine, his gentle tone whispering, "Music stands as the sole tongue that always speaks true, my little Elenita. Let it reveal your reality." Reality. That hit the core. My own reality had been muffled far too long. Steel girding me once more, I averted my gaze from my relatives. I severed that visual link with my mother, a gesture that severed the final tether to her dominance. I pivoted fully to face the piano, presenting my back to the crowd and their presumptions. In that instant, the grand hall, my kin, the event, all faded away. Nothing remained but the instrument and me. The hush enveloping the space had turned utterly charged and poised. It shifted from bewilderment to eager suspense. I sensed it hanging in the atmosphere, a bottled-up communal vibe eager for unleashing. The MC had stepped aside to the stage's edge, watching me with an unreadable look. He'd yielded the spotlight to me. Nobody would intervene now. The decision rested solely with me. I rested my palms on the keys, sensing their even poise under my touch. They felt sleek and chilled, an untouched slate. Not like the faded, battered ivories on my grandfather's old upright. These carried no past, but I was set to etch one into them. I drew in a steady breath and paused, relishing that fleeting peace right before the tempest. My mind wandered to the melody he'd shown me, his original creation, laced with sorrow yet brimming with defiant optimism. It didn't aim to dazzle through flashy skill, but to expose the essence of the spirit. It chronicled a fellow who'd discovered grace amid suffering, and soon it would echo my own tale. It served as the sole retort to the shame, the one path to reclaiming my expression. I shut my eyes briefly. No longer was I in that upscale charity affair at a swanky Miami Beach resort. I was transported to that modest, dust-laden chamber in our Coral Gables estate, scented with aged timber and echoes of yesteryears. My grandfather's essence seemed to hover near, his comforting aura wrapping around me like a soft coverlet. His inheritance wasn't the wealth or prestige my mother chased. It was this harmony, this sanctuary, this enduring verity pulsing within. And amid the profound quiet of that opulent room packed with unknowns, my pulse sinking to the tune poised to emerge, I readied myself to unveil my authentic self to all. I would perform, not for them or my loved ones, but for the young woman who'd concealed herself in shadows, and for the elder who'd shown her how to soar. The atmosphere hummed with pent-up strain. I perceived countless stares boring into my rear, each harboring its own query. Who might this young woman be? What bold move was she planning? Intrigue had supplanted apathy entirely. From her spot at the table, my mom was likely plotting countless schemes to downplay the fiasco, to spin this uprising into some quirky tale. But deep down, I realized nothing could diminish what was unfolding. I stood ready to reshape the tale she'd so meticulously woven. My fingertips lingered above the keys, poised in midair for a heartbeat that stretched into forever. Then, within that hallowed electric quietude, bearing the full load of my suppressed existence, I struck the opening chord. A crisp, unadulterated, wistful tone that cut through the space and saturated it all. That initial tone, bright and alone, drifted across the thick ambiance of the hall like an inquiry. It rang neither boisterous nor forceful, but lamenting and pristine, a resonance alien to that realm of shallow chatter and contrived mirth. The low buzz throughout the venue didn't cease in a rush, but ebbed gradually, akin to waves pulling back from the beach. Nearby tables quieted first, followed by those farther off, until an utter, anticipatory calm gripped the whole assembly. I experienced that calm not as burden, but as a void I could at last populate with my personal timbre, the ire etched on my mother's. Her expression hardened, forming a rigid veil of incredulity. She had aimed to tuck me away out of sight, yet here I was, quieting the whole room with just one chord. My hands glided across the keys with an ease that overrode any anxiety. This wasn't a showy display of skill. There were no wild cascades or blistering tempos. It was Grandpa's creation, a tune that narrated a tale. It opened with a soft melancholy. The tones conjured the sensation of strolling through a vacant home, the resonance of isolation in each harmony. It captured the tale of the neglected chamber, the overlooked instrument draped in a pale cover. Through sound, I was voicing all those eras of obscurity, of being pushed to the sidelines. I avoided eye contact with the crowd. My focus stayed on my fingers, though I sensed the venue's vibe altering as idle interest morphed into profound, authentic focus. I was exposing my innermost self amid strangers, and surprisingly, shame didn't touch me. Initially, the listeners wore puzzled looks. Folks likely anticipated some breezy soundtrack to pair with their sweets and networking chats. Yet Grandpa's work insisted on attention. It carried a weight, a raw sincerity that pierced the contrived vibe of the gathering. Utensils halted midway to lips. Goblets lingered in midair. Polished grins faded, yielding to looks of reflection and astonishment. The high society crowd from Miami, the very ones Mom labored to dazzle with her fortune and prestige, were now entranced by the dismissed pastime of her overlooked child. The twist was so thick it lingered on my tongue, a tangy undertone blending with the tune. I glanced up briefly, locking eyes with the head table once more. Mom's face had shifted from stunned to a chill, restrained rage. She perched bolt upright, a strained grin affixed to her mouth, as though this fit her scripted agenda. But her stare revealed another truth. They were icy shards vowing harsh reprisal. Brianna, seated next to her, had moved past embarrassment to mere shock. Her lips parted faintly, her eyes darting from my spot on stage to her bubbly drink, weighing the fallout of my defiance, and then to Dad. Dad stood out as the sole figure whose demeanor genuinely transformed. The bewilderment on his features melted away, revealing an intensity I hadn't witnessed in ages. Complete, undivided focus aimed squarely at me. As I progressed through the composition, dread vanished entirely. In its stead emerged an odd, potent bond with everyone present. The throng ceased to be faceless observers. They became observers to my truth. The majestic instrument, once so daunting and foreign, now seemed like part of my very form. Each tone I struck became an unspoken declaration, an assertion of presence and worth, a revelation of my essence. The score surged through me with a fluidity that caught even me off guard. For the first time ever, I wasn't seeking approval to simply be. I was staking my claim, measure by measure, pause by pause. And through that bold act of self-assertion, I uncovered a resilience I never realized I held. The theme shifted. The starting sorrow yielded to a stormier, fiercer passage. The sounds recounted the slight at the venue's doorway, my siblings' offhand disdain, the myriad moments when my words were muted. It started as a mournful plea, gradually building to a defiant roar. My digits danced across the ivories, not fueled by wrath, but by a freeing fervor. I channeled every hurt into the notes, reshaping it into something exquisite and mighty. I was converting the venom they'd fed me over the years into a healing balm. The unfiltered sentiment swelled across the space, a surge of empathy that engulfed all, compelling them to experience my burdens, to grasp it wordlessly. That's when it hit me fully. Dad inclined toward the edge of his seat, forearms on the surface, his posture fully turned to the platform. The stoic facade of the deal-driven executive, forever fixated on transactions and facades, fractured. His gaze, which had long pierced right past me, now tracked my motions intently, and under the gentle glow of the hall, I spotted something that almost threw my rhythm, a shimmer of moisture gathering at his eye's edge, not from sorrow, but from awakening. Right then, he grasped the depth of what he'd overlooked, realizing the child he believed he understood was merely an outline of the individual now revealed. He was beholding me, genuinely perceiving me at last. Mom caught Dad's shift. Her attention flicked from me to him in a split second, layering fresh anger, now tinged with alarm, onto her visage. His emotional response shattered her version of events. It exposed a fissure in the polished family image she'd crafted. Her grip on the room was slipping away right before the eyes of the crowd she aimed to dominate. She attempted to speak, to edge closer, to murmur something that might jolt him back to reality, but she hesitated and held back. Deep down, she realized it was pointless. The enchantment of the melody gripped too tightly. Her helplessness hung in the air, radiating from her across the space between them. She was forfeiting the fight, and the cruelest twist was that she was yielding it to me. I drove the composition toward its peak. The tune ascended, saturating the enormous hall with an irresistible power. This section of the work was what my grandfather had labeled as hope. A cascade of tones evoking endurance, a splendor that refused to fade. I invested every ounce of my remaining energy into those closing bars. All the shame, the isolation, the quiet resolve that had accumulated within me. It surged through my fingertips and burst forth in a grand, rebellious resonance. It served as my ultimate statement, my emphatic conclusion. No longer was I the overlooked figure in the shadows. I embodied the tempest. I was the blaze. I was the harmony itself. And right there, beneath the glare of the spotlights, I sensed a truer version of myself than at any other time. The concluding chord lingered in the atmosphere, echoing with a pure, bell-like precision that stretched on forever. My fingers hovered above the keys as the vibration gradually diminished until it vanished entirely. Then came the void, a hush. Yet it wasn't barren. It was thick, weighty, infused with the raw sentiment of all that had unfolded. I sensed the unified pause of countless breaths trapped in lungs across the assembly, in that profound quiet, enduring maybe just a couple of seconds but stretching like an age. I understood my victory. Applause wasn't necessary. That instant of utter calm, of mutual acknowledgement, formed my genuine tribute. It stood as undeniable evidence that my expression had at last been acknowledged. Then the initial clap shattered the stillness. It didn't erupt as an instant storm of cheers, but rather a lone, intentional, echoing strike. It originated from an elderly gentleman at a prominent table, a prominent builder and benefactor named Mr. Sterling, whom my mother had been wooing throughout the night with her finest array of allure. He rose gradually, his gaze locked on me, and his palms met in a solid, reverent strike. This wasn't mere politeness. It was a judgment. In that fleeting second, his action affirmed my creation in a manner my family never had. That solitary rhythm of applause ignited the expanse like a spark on dry grass. The weight of his endorsement allowed the entire venue to emote freely, unmasked, and the realm my mother had meticulously constructed started to quake at its core. Like ripples chasing the initial surge, the whole assembly surged upright. The noise amplified rapidly, a thunderous endorsement that struck me with tangible impact. This transcended the courteous nods for an incidental performer. It was fervent, authentic, a full-throated acclaim on their feet. The clamor permeated every nook, rebounding from the glittering fixtures overhead and pulsing through the parquet beneath to envelop me on my bench. It was a bellow of embrace, a symphony from myriad unfamiliar souls who, in mere moments, had grasped my narrative more deeply than my own mother had across 2 decades. I stayed still, soaking in that torrent of affirmation, letting it scour away layers of uncertainty and disgrace, depositing me renewed and quivering on the edge of an unfamiliar world. It ranked as the most exquisite auditory experience of my life. Gradually, as though emerging from a prolonged reverie, I pivoted on the seat to confront the throng. My sight swam with the moisture now tracing paths down my face. But these weren't drops of sorrow. They marked release. I beheld an ocean of joyful expressions, of touched individuals, of outsiders regarding me with awe-inspiring esteem. These were the Miami power players, the influential figures my mother wielded as a benchmark for worth, and everyone stood in my honor, championing what she dismissed as my immature diversion. The twist of fate was so sharp and fitting that a faint chuckle, bordering on a gasp, slipped from my mouth. I had stepped into that grand space as a hidden embarrassment, yet now I occupied its heart. The obscure nook I'd been relegated to had transformed into the focal point, and the illumination was mine. My eyes naturally drifted to my family's spot, the ground zero of the upheaval I'd unleashed, and there they were. Celeste appeared ghostly ashen, a pallor no lavish cosmetics could mask. She had risen alongside the others, yet her motion was robotic, a rote action to avoid appearing detached. Her grin had solidified into a ghastly rictus, her stare locked on me with a blank daze, as if beholding a specter. The astonishment had crushed her anger, rendering her vulnerable and mute. Every bit of her influence, her societal command, had evaporated with the dying echo of my melody. She had been vanquished on her turf, using her tactics amid her followers. She observed as the award she'd buffed with such precision, belonging to Brianna, paled in comparison to the artifact she'd stashed away in the loft. Brianna, standing next to her, joined in the clapping too, though her gaze revealed the turmoil churning within. Her expression blended bafflement, envy, and a reluctant admiration she'd never directed my way until now. She shifted her attention between me and the tycoon, along with the elite guests surrounding us, and I watched as understanding dawned in her shrewd thoughts. She grasped that the influence I'd unveiled couldn't be purchased, passed down, or networked into existence. It was genuine, a quality that eluded her despite her array of corporate accolades and strategic triumphs. Right then, those gleaming glass figurines adorning the shelf in our Coral Gables home seemed utterly dull. They were lifeless trinkets, whereas my melody pulsed with vitality. Yet it was my father's response that ultimately shattered my emotional barriers. Marcus wasn't merely on his feet, he led the wave of cheers. His claps rang out the strongest, the most fervent, with tears streaming unchecked down his cheeks. These weren't the droplets of an executive stirred by a charming tune. They were the outpouring of a parent confronting a harsh reality after years of oversight. His stare, locked on mine, brimmed with a fierce sense of accomplishment that stung, yet also carried a profound, tangible sorrow. From afar, across the gap between us, his mouth shaped two unspoken phrases I deciphered perfectly. "Forgive me." In that very second, I understood that a core element of our household had fractured and reformed irrevocably. As the applause started to fade, the event host, sporting a sincere grin that supplanted his prior bewilderment, stepped forward to guide me from the platform. "Utterly remarkable, Miss Rucker," he murmured, regarding me with an almost worshipful awe. Descending to my seat, the pathway cleared ahead. Attendees parted not to overlook me but to observe my progress. A few softly brushed my shoulder, whispering, "Well done." "That's pure enchantment," remarked a lady draped in a sparkling choker. "Much obliged," replied a gentleman, his tone thick with feeling. I was no longer the overlooked figure in the background. I was the one commanding the keys. I'd entered the evening as a forgotten orb in orbit, and now I departed as a freshly ignited celestial body, leaving wonder in my trail. Arriving at our family spot felt like stepping into the calm core of a tempest. The atmosphere crackled with charged unease. Brianna settled swiftly and fixated on her goblet of wine like it held the universe's secrets. Celeste lingered upright a bit more, her frame stiff as carved stone, before easing into her chair with measured intent. Neither met my eyes. The quiet among us yawned like a chasm, brimming with harsh utterances exchanged and the regrets that would stay unspoken forever. The disparity hit hard. I'd just basked in the affection and esteem from an entire hall of unfamiliar faces, only to face the icy chill from my own mom and sibling. But an inner shift had occurred in me. Their hush no longer wounded. It was mere static. Marcus was the one who shattered the enchantment. He advanced with a resolve uncommon in our domestic dealings. He claimed an unoccupied seat, not tucked away, but prominently placed, and positioned it beside his own. Then, meeting my gaze, he extended a motion that blended summons and command. "Ava, join us here." His words carried authority, crisp and unyielding. I took the spot, and he eased the chair forward with care. The gesture was basic, yet its meaning vast. He was drawing me from obscurity into my deserved spot. Without seeking input from anyone, he was openly reshaping my role in the clan. It marked his initial display of authentic parenting in ages, serving as a steadying force amid the chaos. Now positioned at his side, my dad lifted his glass just a touch. He regarded the associates at our table, who eyed me with fresh intrigue and deference. Then, his tone rich with undeniable accomplishment, he declared, "Allow me to present my daughter, Ava." He halted briefly, his look crossing my mother's for a split second. She's the true creative force in our home. No challenge laced his delivery, just a plain declaration of reality, one long overlooked. To my mother, that must have landed like a blow. He wasn't merely recognizing me. He was openly revising the story she'd pushed forward. He was restoring equilibrium to our family dynamics, with the balance now favoring me. I shot a final look her way. Her features, once ashen from surprise, now burned with helpless rage. But as our stares connected, I detected more than wrath. I saw closure. The dominance she'd wielded over me, the ability to diminish and dismiss, had vanished. Her validation was no longer the goal I craved. I came to understand that my value wasn't tied to her judgment, but rested squarely in my grasp, tied to the melodies my grandfather had left behind. That inheritance, which she'd attempted to stash away in a forgotten corner, had just illuminated Miami's grandest dance hall. I averted my gaze from her and faced my father instead, who regarded me with a profound blend of sorrow and affection. Right then, I no longer craved a shadowy nook to retreat to. I discovered my footing, not among the seats at the table, but deep inside my core. The drive back in my father's Cadillac Escalade marked the most hushed, yet resonant journey of my existence. Marcus handled the wheel, his fingers clenched pale around it, though he'd occasionally steal a peek at me through the mirror, his expression weaving pride with regret. I settled in the back seat behind him, sensing for the first time a real presence in that vehicle. Celeste occupied the front passenger spot, stiff like stone, fixated on the blurring city glow outside. Not a syllable escaped her lips. Her quietude roared like a battle signal, hinting at future reckoning. Brianna, next to me, fixated on her screen with obvious pretense. The car's atmosphere hung thick, buzzing with the burden of a family empire that had shattered and reformed amid one melody. Nobody ventured a word, yet the full story had unfolded. The following dawn, an odd noise drifted up from below. It wasn't the gentle chatter of the household help, but a steady thud of hefty items being shifted with care. Descending the steps, I spotted my father in the entrance hall, overseeing a pair of movers. They were skillfully guiding my grandfather's vintage piano from its dusty confines. My father pivoted upon noticing me, his gaze holding a resolve uncommon beyond conference rooms. "Morning, Ava," he greeted steadily yet decisively. "This piece warrants a proper home. We're shipping it off for full refurbishment and tuning, then installing it right where it belongs." He left the spot unspoken. His action served as a bold statement, righting a wrong he'd tolerated far too long. At that instant, Celeste emerged atop the staircase, draped in her satin wrap. Her features twisted into a visage of frosty rage at the sight. "Marcus, what on earth is this?" she spat, her tone slicing like shattered shards. My father held steady, meeting her stare squarely and replying with unflappable poise. "It signals shifts ahead, Celeste. This home will celebrate true artistry beyond mere awards." She descended, halting several paces away from me. She eyed me like some pest that had wrecked her flawless sanctuary. "You've wrecked it all," she murmured, each syllable dripping poison. I held my silence. I just met her look, and suddenly her wrath slid past me harmlessly. It glanced off some unseen barrier I hadn't realized existed. Her hold on me lay shattered for good. That afternoon I encountered Brianna in the kitchen. She brewed coffee with stiff, measured motions. The quiet between us stretched uncomfortably until she broke it, eyes averted. "I had no idea you played that way," she whispered, her tone faint. No kindness laced her remark, yet disdain was absent too. It stood as plain acknowledgement, a reluctant nod to an undeniable reality. "Seems there's plenty about me you haven't grasped," I answered gently. She dipped her head in slow agreement, grabbed her mug, and departed wordlessly. No bridge was mended, nor would one ever form, but acknowledgement had dawned. In her realm of measurable successes, my playing now registered as something she couldn't dismiss lightly. Our dynamic eased into fresh ground, a courteous gap, an icy armistice linking realms that would forever elude full comprehension. 14 days on, my father and I secured a modest flat for me in Coconut Grove. He pushed to cover the security deposit and initial rents, not to wield influence, but as a gesture of harmony, a concrete step to atone for prolonged oversight. "You deserve your independence, Ava," he said while we finalized the documents, "a haven where your music takes priority." Celeste resisted fiercely, viewing it as one last insult, as though I were deserting the clan. In reality, I was shedding her distorted take on family to forge my path. Come relocation day, she stayed secluded in her quarters, offering no farewell, and strangely, her non-appearance stung no more. It merely affirmed my choice was sound. My fresh digs weren't some lavish estate worth millions, yet to me they shone like royalty. Sunlight poured through expansive panes, carrying scents of crisp coating and fresh starts. When the refurbished piano from my grandfather rolled in that day, tears welled up. The crew positioned it smack in the living room's heart, beneath the prime sill. The rich ebony finish of the wood gleamed with a gentle warmth these days. Whenever my fingers brushed against the smooth ivory keys, the tones emerged full and flawless. No longer was it just an old keepsake tucked away in a forgotten corner. Now it pulsed as the soul of my household, the steady foundation of my fresh start. Each day I'd settle in to perform, not chasing some tryout or seeking admiration from others, but purely for the joy it brought. Melody had shifted from an escape from reality to my means of embracing it fully. Just 7 days into my new residence, my phone rang. It was the aide to that real estate magnate who'd risen first during the event's applause. He explained that his employer, Mr. Sterling, had been deeply touched by my rendition and wished to extend an opportunity. Not some flashy contract or global itinerary, but a gift far more tangible and precious. Through his charitable organization, he'd cover a complete fellowship for a graduate program in piano interpretation at Juilliard in New York, and he'd take charge of backing me himself. The proposal left me stunned. That youthful pastime my mother had dismissed as trivial had evolved into the very tool that unlocked my path ahead, a path I'd shaped through a quiet act of defiance in one fateful evening. The ensuing weeks solidified the rhythm of my transformed existence. My father and I connected multiple times weekly. He'd inquire about my compositions, my aspirations for the city, the minor details of my routine. He was discovering his child, and I was uncovering my dad. Exchanges with Brianna remained sparse, confined to brief notes on special occasions. We upheld a polite separation, akin to colleagues honoring one another's domains. Celeste faded from my life entirely. Dad mentioned she wouldn't even acknowledge me in conversation. I hadn't anticipated remorse, nor did I crave it anymore. Her quietude ceased to sting like discipline. It merely confirmed her preference for a facade of perfection above all else. I'd at last prioritize my authentic self over her validation. These days, perched before my grandfather's instrument in my Miami flat, with the evening light of the sun pouring in through the glass, I frequently reflect on that evening, not with resentment or sorrow, but with an odd wave of appreciation. That embarrassment became the blaze that tempered my spirit. It propelled me from the shadows where they'd cast me and guided me to claim my radiance right in the spotlight. My hands dance across the notes, and the harmony swells through the air, a tune born not from suffering, but from serenity. It's the tale of a young woman who realized her value lay not in awards on a shelf or external nods, but in the honest echo within her soul. And in the end, that inner voice proved sufficient. The deepest insight from that evening transcended notes or the thrill of cheers. It concerned the confines we permit others to impose on us, and worse, those we choose to linger in voluntarily. My mother had relegated me to a literal nook in that venue, yet for years I'd inhabited an inner shadow, believing my essence too insignificant to emerge, to make waves, to intrude. The true foe wasn't her directive, but the fragment of myself ready to comply. I uncovered that the toughest barrier to shatter isn't the one imposed by outsiders, but the one we embrace as familiar. Emerging from that nook transcended merely approaching the platform. It meant advancing toward my core identity, reasserting the territory that was mine from the start. What unfolded next revealed that kin aren't solely the origins of your birth, but the spaces where you truly thrive. My father, upon truly seeing me, started erecting a connection long dilapidated. His backing demonstrated that genuine affection doesn't require you to shine as a prize. It honors the singular symphony you hold within. In contrast, my mother and sibling lingered across the divide my display had carved. Their failure to rejoice in my success illuminated how certain individuals cherish you only while you diminish yourself, fearing your glow might reveal their hidden flaws. I grasped the harsh but freeing truth. Occasionally, to uncover your real kin, you must risk estranging the family fate assigned you. Each of us harbors an instrument gathering dust in some overlooked spot. For you, it might not involve keys and strings, perhaps a manuscript longing to be penned, a venture you're hesitant to launch, a candid admission you're afraid to voice, or merely an essence you've muted to blend in. It's that fervent spark others label a diversion, an indulgence, or pointless effort. It's your truest facet, the one society, and at times your nearest relations, urges you to conceal because it lacks utility or gain. It disrupts the ideal image. On the gala's night, I didn't merely coax sounds from my grandfather's heirloom. I amplified every muted gift, every aspiration pushed aside. And here's my plea to you. Locate your instrument, clear away the grime, and play your melody without seeking clearance. Transformation doesn't always crash in like a deliberate tempest. At times, it arrives quietly in the quiet resolve of a choice, through one bold move that catches everyone off guard. There was no elaborate scheme for payback or to impart some moral, just an ache so profound that the sole escape was to reshape it into something greater. The chance emerged on a brief message tucked into a leaflet, an opening that fate had conveniently overlooked for me. What I've come to realize is that existence brims with such gaps, those unforeseen platforms waiting in the wings. The real issue isn't if they'll show up, but if we'll summon the guts to stride onto them when the moment strikes. You don't have to overhaul your entire existence in an instant. All it takes is one instant, a lone instant where you opt for your own expression rather than letting dread win. Such an instant has the power to reshape it all. The real victory wasn't the thunderous cheers from a room packed with unfamiliar faces. It was the inner hush that ensued. It was the peace of realizing that regardless of cheers or jeers, I'd stayed authentic to who I am. Approval from others is like candy, tempting and habit-forming, yet it ultimately hollows you out. Inner affirmation, on the other hand, is the sustenance that feeds your spirit. I don't require my mom's gaze anymore, my siblings' comprehension, or society's nod of acceptance. I discovered my own endorsement in the resonance of that final tone, in the assurance that my grandpa would have beamed with pride, and in my dad's expression, which shifted from viewing me as a letdown to seeing me as a breakthrough. My value was never up for debate. The sole uncertainty was whether I'd managed to acknowledge it for myself. Maybe you've sensed it too, like being relegated to the dimmest edge of the room. Perhaps within your household, at work, or even in your innermost thoughts, you've been discouraged, verbally or through quiet dismissal, from seeking the spotlight, warned that your glow is overwhelming or that your tune clashes with the ensemble. If that's your reality, let this sink in. That edge isn't your fate. It's merely a launch pad. The shame weighing on you now could spark the blaze that guides you forward later. My value never hinged on my mom's endorsement, and neither does yours rely on anyone else's. Your value is innate. It's unbreakable, and it's ready for you to seize it on your own terms. If my tale has stirred something in you, if it echoes a struggle you're enduring, know this: you're far from isolated. There's an entire network of folks right here who get the grind of striving to be noticed and amplified. I'd love to hear your experiences in the replies. Share what that instrument is that you're yearning to perform on. And if you'd like more tales that affirm the importance of our voices, hit subscribe on this channel and enable alerts. United, we can demonstrate to the world that the shadowed nooks are frequently where the most radiant lights emerge. Don't ever allow anyone to mute your melody.